Hello and welcome to the Carbon University. My name is Amanda, and in this two-part session on the carbon offset project cycle, I will give a practical guide on the steps to take a potential carbon project and idea to its issuance and commercialization. This training assumes basic knowledge of carbon offsets, Article 6, and Core SEER. Please watch those courses in our catalogue if you need an introduction or refresher on those themes. Let's go straight into it. Let's start with a key distinction. A carbon project is really two separate tracks running largely in parallel, not one single sequence. There's what we will refer to as the core project cycle, the regulatory and certification track, selecting the project, choosing a program and methodology, drafting the PDD, validation, registration, verification, issuance, transfer. And separately, there's the project physical implementation, SAT, the actual, on-the-ground work of designing, permitting, constructing, and operating the project. These two tracks are not the same thing, and they don't wait for each other. Design and construction can begin well before registration is complete. And critically, a project is typically operating, often for months, sometimes for years, before it's ever verified or issued a single credit. Registration is not the starting gun for construction, and it's certainly not the starting gun for operation. Keep this picture in mind throughout everything that follows. The core project cycle has 9 key phases: project selection, registry and methodology selection, and then developing the project design document, the PDD. Thereafter, one has to prepare for and undertake a third-party validation by an independent and accredited entity of your project to ensure it is meeting the registry and methodology requirements. If the third-party validator signs off, you can register the project at the registry who hosts the methodology you are using. Once the project is up and running for some time, typically 12 months or more, you estimate based on the methodology chosen and the project's performance how many credits you generated and engage a third-party verification company, also an accredited entity, to review your proposed numbers. If the verifier is comfortable with your project's adherence to the carbon methodology you are using and how many credits it generated during a given period, it submits its recommendation to the registry. The registry does its own final verification and, if in agreement with your numbers, issues the credits in your favor. Let's dive into each one of them in detail. Let's start with a key decision. For which market is this project built for? Voluntary and/or compliance market. And if for compliance market, for which of the segments of that market? A purely voluntary project generates non-authorized credits. Under Article 6.2, a host country can authorize an internationally transferred mitigation outcome, or EATMO. Under Article 6.4, the UNFCCC own terminology is precise here. An authorized unit is called an authorized Article 6.4 ER, while a non-authorized one is formally termed a mitigation contribution, Article 6.4 ER or MC Article 6.4 ER. That exact naming matters if you're navigating UN documentation directly. Core SEER is stricter still. Under Core SEER current phase, host country attestation of a corresponding adjustment is mandatory for eligibility, which means an unauthorized voluntary credit simply cannot be used for Core SEER compliance, however high its quality otherwise. One may also consider selling under Article 6.2 arrangement or try to sell to Japan's joint crediting mechanism, and some projects target domestic compliance schemes directly. This choice affects government engagement, pricing, risk, cash flow cycle and capital required, NDC treatment, and which buyers can even use the resulting credits. The very first technical question any credible carbon project must answer is, would this have happened anyway? This is the concept of additionality. Developers typically demonstrate it using recognized tests, a financial test, a barrier test, and a common practice test. There's also a regulatory surplus consideration. Activities that are both legally required and effectively enforced will generally struggle to qualify as additional, though this is always subject to the applicable methodology and program rules, not an absolute rule of thumb. It's also a common misconception that carbon finance has to be formally applied for before construction begins. In practice, methodologies set their own rules on project start dates and on when carbon revenue was first considered, and registration doesn't necessarily have to precede construction. Getting this analysis right early saves time and money later. Risk varies a great deal by project type, so let's pause here, though I want to stress these classifications are illustrative only as there are far more project types than in this slide. Real risk depends on geography, methodology, technology, policy, and project-specific circumstances. With that caveat, renewable energy often carries higher additionality risk today as technology costs fall, but low permanence risk since there's no stored carbon to reverse. Forestry and REDD+ sit at the other end. Significant permanence risk from fire, disease, or illegal logging. Cookstove and fuel switching projects are sometimes assumed to be lower risk, but that undersells real challenges around baseline assumptions actual usage rates, the rebound effect, and fraction of non-renewable biomass calculations. And engineered removals aren't uniform either. Geological storage can be extremely durable, while biochar's durability depends heavily on feedstock, production, and application. The two shouldn't be grouped together. Crediting periods vary substantially by program and methodology version, so treat any ranges as illustrative examples, not fixed norms. Beyond additionality, several other criteria shape whether a project is a good candidate for generative carbon offsets. Feasibility asks whether there's sufficient technical, financial, and legal capacity to actually deliver. Permanence is critical for nature-based projects. Leakage is the risk that protecting one area simply displaces the harmful activity elsewhere. Measurability and legal rights matter too. And increasingly, buyers scrutinize co-benefits, local livelihoods, biodiversity, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Getting these criteria right at the outset shapes everything that follows. Before going much further, we need to stop at a dedicated legal and rights gate. Land tenure and carbon rights need to be established under applicable national law. These are not always the same thing. The project proponent needs demonstrable authority to develop and register the project. Community rights and any benefit sharing arrangements need to be documented, particularly where indigenous or traditional land rights are involved. And developers should actively check for prior encumbrances, competing claims, or the risk of the same activity being registered under more than one program at once. Alongside legal rights, there's a second gate that deserves its own checkpoint, particularly for any project targeting Article 6, host country policy and revocation risk. Political will can shift. A government supportive of carbon markets today may not be tomorrow. Some host countries have introduced or discussed export taxes or levies on internationally transferred credits. Authorization approvals through a designated national authority can be slow and aren't guaranteed once requested. And the host country's own national carbon registry infrastructure needs to actually be functional enough to issue, track, and correspondingly adjust units reliably. None of this is a reason to avoid Article 6 projects, but it is a reason to assess it explicitly before committing capital. Once you're confident a project is a good candidate, the next decision is which carbon crediting program or registry to develop it under. The program is the standard setter. It approves methodologies and sets the rules. The registry is principally the transaction and record-keeping infrastructure, though in practice, one organization like Verra often operates both functions together. To give you a sense of the range available, here are 11 programs spanning different regions, sectors, and scales. Those range from Verra's high-volume, general-purpose VCS program to PACM, the UN-administered Paris Agreement crediting mechanism and successor to the Clean Development Mechanism, through Gold Standard's Sustainable Development focus. It includes regional players like the American Carbon Registry and Climate Action Reserve. It also includes registries with a given focus, such as Global Carbon Council and Biocarbon Registry, community-focused Plan Vivo, City Forest Credit's Urban Forestry niche, and newer entrants like Puro and Isometric, focus purely on engineered removals. This is nowhere near an exhaustive list. There are many more programs out there, but it should give you a feel for just how varied this landscape is before you commit. Migrating between programs partway through a project is genuinely difficult and program dependent, so treat your choice as a very costly decision. Selecting a methodology drives the physical project implementation requirements. The first question, does an approved methodology already exist for this exact project type? If yes, the job becomes checking its version, current status, and any transition date, confirming it's actually suitable for a new project, not just historically approved. If no methodology exists, the next question is whether a top-up or revision to an existing framework is possible, which is faster, or whether an entirely new methodology needs to be developed from scratch, which is a far longer and more expensive route, often adding a year or more before a project can even be validated. The good news is that there are a lot of methodologies already approved considering all the registry and programs. This is an indicative list only. Verra's library, for instance, runs into the hundreds, spanning energy, forestry, waste, and agriculture. PACM, the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism, inherits a large legacy library from the Clean Development Mechanism, much of it now being reviewed and adapted under the new mechanism's rules. Gold Standard and the American Carbon Registry each offer several dozen. Climate Action Reserve has a smaller, deeply developed set focused on North America. Smaller or more specialized programs, Plan Vivo, Global Carbon Council, Biocarbon Registry, City Forest Credits, Puro, and Isometric offer anywhere from a single specialized protocol to a small, growing library, often deliberately focused on one type of project rather than trying to cover everything. These figures are approximate and change frequently, so always confirm the current count directly with the program. But the broader point stands. A developer has a genuinely wide range of methodological options to choose from. With the program and methodology chosen, the next major task is developing the project design document, or PDD. Think of the PDD as the project's founding technical blueprint. A well-developed PDD typically covers the project description, the baseline and additionality case, and the GHG quantification and monitoring approach. Where reversal risk is relevant, a permanence and buffer plan sets out how that risk is assessed and mitigated, though treatment is program and methodology specific. A stakeholder consultation and safeguards section documents engagement and risk management. And on legal status, carbon rights and contractual entitlement are typically evidenced across a wider set of documents: land agreements, legislation, benefit sharing agreements, project participation agreements, and offtake agreements, not the PDD alone. Let's be precise about who's actually involved, because the developer owns the project is a real oversimplification. The project proponent submits and manages the registration, but the asset owner, the landowner, the operator, the community, the financier, and the carbon rights holder can all be different parties. Technical and methodology consultants model the baseline and draft the technical sections. Legal counsel confirms tenure, rights, and agreements. Realistically, PD development commonly takes 3 to 9 months. Before and alongside drafting the PDD, several preparatory work streams need to happen. A feasibility study confirms technical and financial viability. Volume estimates model, conservatively, the likely emission reductions. Risk considerations are usually captured in a formal risk register. And free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC, is particularly relevant where Indigenous people's rights are affected. Broader stakeholder consultation doesn't automatically amount to FPIC. That preparatory work is critical before the project is submitted for validation. The stronger that preparatory work is, the higher the chances of a successful validation. The weaker it is, the longer the validation will take, and the lower will be its chances of success. Once the PDD is complete, it goes through validation by an accredited third-party auditor, known as a Validation and Verification Body, or VVB. Accreditation and approval arrangements differ by program and jurisdiction. Validators scrutinize the PDD. Is the baseline reasonable? Is additionality demonstrated? Does the methodology apply correctly? It's very common for validators to raise corrective action requests, or CARs, which the developer must resolve before a positive report is finalized. It is an interactive process, with multiple discussions between the project and the validators team to ensure the validator has all the information and understanding to approve the project. With a positive validation, the project moves toward registration. Under Vera's process, as an example, the public comment period commonly happens earlier during pipeline listing, before the final project description and completed validation are submitted for registration. Registration establishes the project's initial crediting period. That is for how many years it will be eligible to generate carbon credits. In some cases, it can be renewed and extended. Once registered, the project is officially eligible to generate credits, though credits themselves are issued only later. This completes part 1 of our course on the carbon offset project cycle. In part 2, we'll follow the project through implementation, verification, issuance, and transfer. And what happens after transfer, including the integrity frameworks that increasingly determine whether a credit is actually in demand. Let's go there.